this week we were down in Starlight, Indiana for the annual Hubers gathering of IU coaches and speakers and the fans who got to get up close. A unique opportunity for them once a year. It's a great opportunity for us in the media because we don't get to talk to a lot of the Mike Woodson or the players, and these players, guys, since the end of the NCAA tournament season. The same with Tom Allen. So it's a great opportunity for us to talk to them before we go into another little hibernation of sorts. But it was nice to get to talk to those guys in a while. Mike is always just as open and engaging as can be.
Yeah, I mean, Huber, I think, and obviously it's been going on for a long, long time.
I'm thinking 1991 was the first year because I hate to admit this, I was in college and I was there.
Well, and there was a time when, to be honest, I think it was more. It was not that it's not a big deal, if anybody who maybe doesn't know, the heart of Indiana's booster base really is basically the I-65 corridor between Indianapolis and Louisville. And, there's stop-offs along the way, Columbus, obviously Bloomington, Seymour, et cetera. But just that whole cluster around Louisville, Jeffersonville, New Albany, obviously Louisville itself, that's a big area. And Indiana doesn't get down there as often. Indiana plays basketball games in Indy. It plays football games in Indy. It has events in Indy annually, reunions and things, but it's not quite as sort of omnipresent in Louisville. And so it's always been a big event for just kind of getting in front of that part of your donor base, your booster base. And I think there was a time that predates me when athletics budgets were lower, when just the raw fundraising you do from that night alone, between the money you get for, buying tickets and tables, any kind of auctions you might do, and then maybe a little grip and grin with a few select boosters, that would be a meaningful drop in the bucket, so to speak, of your overall budget. Now, not that it doesn't matter anymore, because it does, but it's not quite what it used to be when you're running $100 million revenues every year. And I think that's one reason why maybe, you could feel comfortable as Indiana turning that into an NIL fundraising event, which it was this year for the first time in its history. But I think the other thing for us, and probably to some extent for Indiana fans, Indiana coaches, administrators, I know baseball's still playing, and every once in a while, the track is still going on, or golf or something like that. But the reality is by late May or early June, when it is, the academic athletic year is pretty much over. And, a lot of kids, most of the athletes aren't on campus. Sometimes basically none of if sports aren't in postseasons, basically nobody's required to be anyway. Some will be around, but nothing's organized. And it's very much kind of the event that I think in a lot of people's minds sort of resets the calendar and turns the page to 2023, 2024. It's when we stop asking so much about last season or about spring camp or whatever, and we start asking much more about, are you looking forward to summer? Are you looking forward to fall? How are you going to shape things up? And usually when we go down there, the basketball and the football players are about to start cycling back onto campus. And so that's meaningful too. But it basically just, it essentially just kind of, like I said, it essentially just kind of sort of resets the calendar, I think, in a lot of ways, and turns your attention to the season to come.
Absolutely. And it's a unique opportunity for a lot of the fans that are down there. As you mentioned, they don't get down there that often. So not only are they getting to have a group come down, but they get to get up close to Mike Woodson. And before that, it was Bob Knight, and which is what started this all, which is how it got started. But that unique opportunity to get that that kind of access, which now it is turned into an NIL opportunity for Indiana, which we'll see how. I'm not sure how they're going to manifest all that. Of course, you get upwards of 900 people there, which that helps. They have an auction. But I think the biggest thing for this is going to be the outreach that they use this for, to talk to these people.
No, I think that's very fair, and not that they wouldn't have engaged with some of these people in different ways. Whether it's one-to-one with certain people, or it's obviously stuff like when you're at the basketball games and they put the QR code up there and say scan this. This is the official collective of IU Athletics and all that. But it's always it's NIL fundraising isn't going to be fundamentally that different from, for example, athletics fundraising, and you're going to constantly sort of be wanting to be in front of people and talk about, hey, how can we strengthen this relationship? Here's what we've been working on. Here's where we'd like to go next. And, here are some, I didn't sit in on the dinner, but I imagine at some point or another, some discussions were had about this is kind of what, the athletes who've been working for Hoosiers for Good, or working with Hoosiers for Good, I should say, have been doing, charitable causes throughout the community. And so I think it's just kind of one of those where I know for some people NIL is kind of new and different, but it's probably not that different from a fundraising perspective. And it's about, building and then maintaining those relationships. And obviously what is different is Indiana can be a direct part of this now. NCAA regulations have loosened and allowed departments to have these sorts of, one-to-one relationships with official collectives, with NIL collectives. And that's very meaningful, obviously, because when you can bring Mike Woodson, when you can bring Tom Allen, when you can bring Scott Dolson, when you can put the weight of the department behind it, and you can get, I know they had an auction, you can get signed memorabilia, you can offer tickets, you can do all these different things. It's obviously that stuff's going to help raise money. But there is also just a part of it that, I suspect if we were talking to Colin Hartman or Tyler Harris, who are two of the, sort of the people in positions of substantial leadership in the Hoosiers for Good and Hoosiers Connect, sort of joint operation, they'd say that there's no substitute for just being able to get with people and build and strengthen relationships and have those. Maybe again, the other thing about Huber is, it's far enough removed from everything that nobody's ever mad about anything. You're never in that room and somebody's like, yeah, but you lost to Purdue last week, and so I'm not feeling the school spirit right now. It's also in the summer when everybody's relaxed. And I think there may be some sort of golf element to it as well. I'm not positive about that, but obviously Fuzzy Zeller's got his course down there. And so, I think that it's a little bit, too, just kind of a good time essentially for everybody to sit down. And like I said, there's just no substitute for that one-to-one interaction.
Absolutely. Changing subject for a second, baseball this weekend, the regionals, of course, are going on, one of which we're keeping an eye on down in Lexington, not only Indiana, but Ball State in that regional. Indiana State has a region. How about the state of Indiana? First of all, you got to give all these teams credit. Getting into the baseball postseason, if you are north of the Mason-Dixon line, is not an easy thing to do. And to get three of these teams in, that's a pretty nice accomplishment. I mean, they're not in the World Series yet, but
no. I mean, listen, I can remember a time when the Big Ten would basically just be a one bid league. I mean, for a long time, it was pretty consistently a one, maybe a two bid league. You go back to Tracy Smith's first appearance in the NCAA tournament. Obviously, that team struggled a lot early in the season, struggled in some of its midweek games, but won the Big Ten tournament. Really powered through the back half of the Big Ten schedule and won the Big Ten tournament. But I mean, that team was the 4 seed in a regional down in Louisville. And that, I forget who the 3 was, but I think Vandy was the 2 and Louisville was the 1, obviously. The point is, the automatic bid out of the Big Ten that year got a 4 seed. I mean, it was treated the way that when you saw Valpo, and I'm not picking on Valpo, but when Valpo came through, when Indiana hosted a regional in 2013, they were the 4 seed. They weren't ever going to rise anything above that. The conference has strengthened. Now, it's never going to be what the ACC is, what the SEC is, what some of the Western or West Coast conferences are. It's just not realistic for a variety of reasons. You're never going to have quite the depth, for example, to be able to maybe build a consistent power the way like the way that Louisville has with Dan McDonald. But I think that, I mean, listen, I'm not this is not me saying Indiana baseball shouldn't be ambitious, but 7 regionals in 11 years and a trip to Omaha is really good. And that's, I think, 3 Big Ten titles in that time, couple Big Ten tournament titles. Obviously, only one time they've gotten out of the first weekend, but a Big Ten team has not known a run like that in a long time. I mean, the only, and I'm looking this up kind of while we talk, the only maybe modern-ish, I guess, comparison would be Bob Todd, who was the longtime baseball coach at Ohio State, and I think they had a run of either 4 tournaments in 5 years or 5 tournaments in 6 years. I don't think they ever made it to Omaha, because I think the last Big Ten team to make it to Omaha before Indiana was Barry Larkin's Michigan team in '84. But listen, you've seen Michigan get back to Omaha. In fact, get to the national championship series. Since then, you've seen Illinois host a regional. I think even a super regional. The conference is not what it used to be, and Indiana has played frankly a really substantial part in that, like a big part in sort of raising the expectation and raising the realistic ambition of a team in the conference that wants to invest. Now, it's also helped that, for example, Indiana's added Maryland, which came with some pedigree from the ACC, has added Nebraska, which will always take baseball seriously. But I can remember when Nebraska came into the league, and Darren Erstad said, we're going to teach the Big Ten how to play baseball. And 2 years later, it was Indiana and Omaha. And Nebraska, I don't think under Erstad's management ever got to the NCAA tournament. They did once. But the point is, I'm kind of rambling here, but the Big Ten is not what it once was. It's not surprising when you see 3-4 teams from the league in the field. It's not surprising when you see a Big Ten team in line to host. I know one didn't this year, but there were times, various points where Indiana and I think maybe Iowa flirted with having a strong enough resume RPI-wise to host. Those kinds of things did not happen 15, 20 years ago. Your Big Ten champion might host, but they might also be the only Big Ten team in the field. And the conference has come on leaps and bounds, frankly, in that sport.
Indiana basketball now is set roster-wise, it seems. I know they have an open scholarship. I'm not sure that they're going to fill that, which I'm trying to stay out of the prediction game now, the way everything has changed. If something comes along, I think that they would, but I don't know that just adding a player, unless they just want to add a body to have that extra body. I know the kid from Mongolian Mike from Dayton that everyone is looking at. He just looks like that's a body to add if that were to happen. But other than that, Indiana seems to be in pretty good shape. Other than people wishing that or wanting to have brought in a name for that additional spot rather, but other than that, they have filled out their roster in a way that it's been better in recent years as far as a team construction, I think.
Yeah, I mean, obviously there is a lot of work to be done in adapting in. You've got as many players coming in as returning. And Mike Woodson, was pretty frank, I thought, about saying there's going to be a lot of work to do this summer. We talked to him, as you said, on Wednesday. He said there's going to be a lot of work to do this summer to figure out roles and get guys comfortable. And it's probably not going to be, the same as it was his first year, but it might, there might be some parallels in terms of just the total number of guys that are going to have to get comfortable with what he wants from them offensively, defensively, et cetera. But I think that in the same breath, I think that, as you said, you don't have to work hard to kind of look at this team and say, if they don't add another player, you've got a pretty set, I don't want to say set, but you've got you've got good competition there with the starting five. You know what Xavier Johnson is. You know what Trey Galloway is. Mackenzie Mbako, I think, has talked about being able to play the three. Obviously, we would expect Malik Renew to be mixing it up for the starting position. Kalel Ware. Behind them, you've got, players like Caleb Banks, Anthony Walker, Peyton Sparks. You will need somebody, and if you don't add another player, and maybe there is an argument for just adding some depth, but if you don't add more depth, then you're going to need somebody from kind of the CJ Gunn, Ja'Kai Newton, Gabe Cupps, Anthony Leal, that sort of quartet. You're going to need a couple of those guys to step up and give you minutes as reserve guards in different ways and in different roles. But it's, for a team that the night they lost to Miami, we all could tell, who was leaving, who was graduating, and then you sort of factored in one or two guys will almost certainly transfer. That's just the nature of the sport these days. You would have looked at it and said there's a lot to do. We don't know where Indiana's points and rebounds and assists and blocks are coming from. You can draw up, at least on paper, a team that makes a lot of sense from what they've been able to do, and a team that's very athletic, very long. I've argued, till I was blue in the face. Looks a lot more like the teams that Mike Woodson built, in his time in New York and certainly his time in Atlanta. And if they add somebody else, then, I would imagine at this point it seems more likely to be a depth piece, both because of what's out there and also because, and I've made this argument, if not to you, then Jim, to other people, I think there's an extent to which Mike Woodson is going to want to say, like, I want to know what my team is very early in the summer. I don't want to be dropping some major contributor in late July unless I absolutely have to, or it's somebody we can't turn down. There's so much to work through in terms of, again, rotations, roles, figuring out what's different when it's Kalel Ware and Malik Renew instead of Trace Jackson Davis and Race Thompson, needing Trey Galloway to take a step forward, needing Xavier Johnson to be a leader. I think he described himself as a big brother on Wednesday to all these guys. A lot of this summer is going to have to be about sort of fostering that chemistry and building just that sort of team dynamic, because you have so many new faces. And I don't think if you're Mike Woodson, unless you just absolutely can't justify not doing it because the player's so good or you desperately need him, I don't know that you'd want to drop, just some sort of curveball in there in like late July or in the preseason, just because you're going to want to be able to work with your team for as long as possible and not have to tear any plans up and kind of start over. So